I first noticed the commotion when a kid in baggy basketball shorts started shouting into his phone like he was auditioning for an Oscar. His voice cracked with the kind of urgency usually reserved for natural disasters, but he was reporting something far less dramatic: a locked gate. He had barricaded himself, or so he claimed. In reality, the barricade he was screaming about was my cedar privacy gate, 6 feet tall, stained a warm honey color, fitted with solid hardware I'd installed myself. The kid was declaring it a matter of public safety that he couldn't barrel through my side yard on his bike. It would have been ridiculous if it weren't so bizarre. He roared into the phone at what sounded like a very unimpressed dispatcher, insisting that I had blocked a public passageway, that I was interfering with the community flow, whatever that meant to a teenager who spent his afternoons carving mud tracks across every yard on the street. The responding officer arrived with the level of calm that only veteran patrol officers possess. He took one look at the gate, walked over, slid the latch open with a casual flick, clacked it twice as if he were testing a pen, then turned to the kid with the most exhausted patience I've ever seen. "Son," he said, monotone and flat, "this is how gates work." The kid sputtered, flustered, trying to argue, but the officer raised a hand and asked to speak with the property owner. I stepped forward, coffee in hand, having already walked out onto the porch to witness the circus unfolding on my lawn. "That would be me," I said. Let me back up. I'm Nolan Pierce, quiet, analytical by trade, hobby woodworker when the weather allows, and a loud coffee drinker according to anyone who has ever lived within 20 feet of me. I moved into Cedar Crest Meadows for 2 very specific reasons: the tall, mature trees that framed the neighborhood in beautiful shade, and the promise of what the glossy brochure had advertised as discreet community living. Instead, what I got was Trisha Malloy. Trisha is the HOA president, and she treats that title like royalty. She wears visors like battle helmets and wields a clipboard with the intensity of someone who believes paperwork is a weapon. She has strong opinions about everything: mailbox hides, trash bin timing, lawn edging precision, even which shade of beige is morally acceptable for a front door. Beige! She has opinions on beige. Her son Brandon leads a small biker gang of middle schoolers who treat our cul-de-sac like their personal BMX stunt arena. They weave between cars, skid across driveways, and cut through yards as though every patch of grass exists solely to cushion their jumps. My side yard was their favorite shortcut, an express route, apparently, which they used at least 3 times a day. They flattened my flower beds, carved mud tracks into the grass, and generally treated my property like a public park. Eventually, I'd had enough. So I did what any rational homeowner would do. I installed a handsome cedar side gate. I matched the wood to the fence, used durable hardware, and stained it to blend perfectly with the color of my home. Trisha called it hostile architecture. I called it a boundary, literally. Then the notes started. Little printed cards, tucked onto my door handle, stamped with an official-looking HOA letterhead that I'm convinced she made at home on her inkjet printer. "Gates discourage community flow," one declared, as though my yard were a designated pedestrian corridor. Then came the fines. Unlawful access reduction, $50. Visual obstinacy, $75. Unauthorized latch, $10. Visual obstinacy? Unauthorized latch? Each citation came signed in her loopy handwriting, the payment deadline aggressively highlighted in neon yellow, like a threat wrapped in highlighter ink. One afternoon, she even leaned into my open garage and delivered a passionate lecture about porous yards and neighborhood connectivity. She used terms like circulation patterns and pedestrian easements with the confidence of someone who had watched exactly one city planning documentary and taken meticulous notes. Then she escalated things to the neighborhood forum. She posted vague messages dripping with passive aggression. Some people have decided to lock their gates, followed by loaded ellipses and a public poll. She screenshotted every supportive comment, printed them, and left them on my windshield like some sort of psychological warfare. Meanwhile, Brandon treated my latch like a personal puzzle box. I found fresh scratches around the hardware every few days. At one point, I discovered tally marks, 14 of them, scratched into the fence in Sharpie. 14 attempts to break into my yard. I wish I were exaggerating. One day, Trisha showed up with a yardstick from her purse like a deranged surveyor. She measured the gate with absurd precision before announcing it was 1 inch too freedom negative. When I asked her what that meant, she simply said I'd understand soon enough. When the fine arrived, I emailed her the architectural approval I had obtained before installing the gate, complete with photos from 3 angles. She replied almost instantly, "Approvals can be spiritually revoked." I reread that sentence 5 times. Spiritually revoked, as though the HOA functioned on mystical interpretation. Everything erupted on a Saturday afternoon. The boys came barreling down the hill on their bikes, heading straight toward my gate as if it were the starting line of a race. I was in the garage sorting tools when I heard the screech of brakes. Brandon discovered the gate was locked and performed what looked like a dramatic Shakespearean gasp. He rattled the gate like he expected it to magically open. When it didn't, he whipped out his phone and called 911. I heard every word. "Yes, it's an emergency," he insisted. "He won't let us through." The dispatcher asked, "Through what?" Brandon replied, as though the logic were painfully obvious. Moments later, Trisha arrived breathless, clutching a wrinkled photocopy of what she claimed was a walking path from 1998. A path, by the way, that had never been built. She insisted my gate had seized community land and that my side yard was technically an easement. She tapped the photocopy like it was a constitutional amendment. The officer asked her for documentation proving the easement. Trisha confidently said she had community memory and historical precedent. The officer slowly turned to look at me. I shrugged. I had long since tried to apply logic to Trisha's crusades. Then, she slipped. Badly. She admitted right in front of the officer that she had tested the lock 3 times that week to verify the obstruction, which explained the scratches. The officer asked whether she had attempted to open a locked gate on someone else's property. Trisha insisted it wasn't someone else's property, it was community adjacent. Those were her exact words. I decided I was done playing defense. I went inside, retrieved my receipts, not metaphorical receipts, but actual physical documented evidence, and returned outside. I presented the recorded plat map showing my property boundaries in crisp black ink stamped by the county recorder. I provided my property survey from 8 months earlier when I'd purchased the house, with the corner pin still in the ground. I handed over the HOA bylaws clearly stating that owners may install and secure gates within their property lines. I even included the ARC approval form signed by none other than Trisha herself just 6 weeks earlier. The patrol sergeant radioed county zoning while Trisha stood there insisting they should consult historical maps. Zoning texted back minutes later, "No easement on lot 42. Property lines confirmed as recorded." That was that. Then I opened my Ring camera app. The officer leaned over to watch. There was Trisha 3 days earlier lifting my latch with a butter knife. There was Brandon yanking on the gate so hard the hinges groaned. And then, in crisp HD, the footage from the previous afternoon, Trisha whispering to her son while gesturing at the gate. The officer asked me to turn up the volume. "If it breaks, it was loose. We just found it that way." 2 weeks later, Cedar Crest held a special meeting. Half the neighborhood came for the drama, the other half came for the Costco cookies. I had requested the meeting formally, and the board treasurer reminded Trisha that any homeowner could call a special session under the bylaws, much to her dismay. I walked into the clubhouse prepared, laptop connected to the projector. Trisha arrived in her sharpest visor. I began presenting. Slide 1, the plat map showing the mythical walking path labeled Proposed, Abandoned 1998, with a note reading, Never constructed, removed from plan 1999. The room murmured. Slide 2, the bylaws clause explicitly stating gates and locks were permitted. Slide 3, the ring compilation, a full 2 minutes of every attempted breach. The room was silent except for Trisha's voice on video urging her son to test access rights. Slide 4, a letter from the county council clarifying that calling 911 for a locked gate was not an emergency and could qualify as misuse of emergency services. Furthermore, repeated attempts to open a locked gate on private property could be considered attempted trespassing. Slide 5, an itemized list of every fine she had issued me, totaling $475, along with my formal request for reimbursement and an apology. The board's attorney cleared his throat and referenced terms like tortious interference, harassment, and abuse of authority. He explained that the HOA could face liability for punishing a homeowner for exercising legal rights. The vote to rescind my fines passed 7-0. Trisha abstained, claiming prejudice. Then came the real surprise. A motion was introduced to censure Trisha for instructing minors to trespass and for abusing her authority. The motion included removing her presidency privileges, her key to the common area storage shed, her reserved parking space, and her $100 monthly stipend. Trisha protested, "But the shed is my office." The treasurer didn't even look up. "It stores folding chairs, Trisha." The motion passed 6-1. Her best friend was the lone dissenting vote. That night, Trisha lost the presidency. She also gained something new, a civil injunction. After reviewing my evidence, the judge ordered that both Trisha and Brandon must remain 5 feet away from my fence unless explicitly invited. The filing fee alone cost her $30, which she complained about loudly on the community forum until the moderators muted her. The HOA issued a formal respect a date policy, complete with a diagram. My latch became the official example in the updated community guidelines distributed to every resident. Brandon now bikes around the cul-de-sac the long way, adding 2 minutes to every loop. As part of his court-ordered community service, he spends weekends repainting neighborhood fences. He and his friends completed a full 40 hours. Trisha sat frozen in her folding chair as the board collected her key, her parking placard, and her clipboard. Her visor sat slightly askew, drooping like a defeated flag. She reached toward the Costco cookie tray, but realized with a faint gasp that, from her new seat, she could no longer reach it. It was the quietest she had ever been. And my gate, my sturdy, beautiful cedar gate, has never sounded better when it clicks shut.